Hello, it's Blue Orange 22. So one of the things about feminism that I disagree with the most and that I dislike the most is the way they talk about circumcision and the way they kind of downgrade the importance of circumcision and kind of trivialize and almost kind of mock the issue of circumcision. And I want to talk about the debate that feminists and MRAs have regarding circumcision, and also in relation to the debate that often happens between comparing circumcision and FGM, female genital mutilation. And this was inspired by this post on 2x chromosomes. I have to tell you, this was very, very disheartening for me to read, and it really kind of bothered me to read this and to see how women and feminists actually feel about male circumcision. You can see the post basically saying, I hate how every time you try and bring up female issues, people bring up male issues too. And then this was one of the comments that got the most upvotes, saying basically every time there's a post about FGM, men come in and talk about circumcision as well. Now, I'm not disagreeing with that blatantly in principle, that if you're talking about FGM, it's really not the time to jump in and talk about male circumcision. I understand where they're coming from with that. But the way this comment thread developed, and I linked it down below so you can kind of follow it, there were so many comments with hundreds or even thousands of upvotes basically mocking and laughing at the issue of circumcision and really kind of making it as not a big deal or not something very important, and kind of laughing at men for being against it. And this kind of shows how feminists just really don't understand how serious circumcision is and what some of the physical effects are. I did a video on that a few months ago, which I have linked below, the physical and the sexual effects of circumcision, where I kind of explained the biology and the anatomy of the foreskin and how it works. But there were lots of comments like this, basically saying how angry and how insane it makes feminists to read MRAs or men in general talking about circumcision. And that really rubbed me the wrong way, because this is something that happened to us, and this is something that actually affected us. Circumcision actually happened to me, and it actually happened to a lot of the men who are talking about it. But these women in this comment thread, and feminists in the West in general, 99.9% of them were not affected by FGM, and this is not something that happened to them. But they feel that they are angry at us because we don't like being circumcised, because we don't like something that happened to our bodies. Feminists are angry at us for that. So we don't even get a say in something that happened to our own bodies, that caused damage to our own bodies. Feminists are angry that we are against circumcision. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Now, when it comes to the debate between comparing circumcision and female genital mutilation, this is something that really annoys me with feminists, is when they use FGM to kind of derail or kind of like try and silence men from talking about circumcision. Like they bring it up as if it's somehow a defense of circumcision, or they bring it up to kind of like shame or embarrass men from talking about circumcision. It's the ultimate example of a whataboutism. Like when we try and talk about circumcision, feminists will come in and say, oh, but what about FGM? It's so much worse. But that's a really stupid argument, because just because something is worse doesn't mean that something else can't be bad. Like just because something exists doesn't mean that something else, even if it's not as bad, still can't be a bad thing. Like you wouldn't say it's okay to cut off someone's hand because cutting off both hands is worse. Or you wouldn't say, well, homelessness isn't bad because cancer is worse. Or pollution isn't bad because genocide is worse. That just makes absolutely no sense at all. And it seems like circumcision is the only issue in the world that's held to this standard. It's the only issue in the world that's measured by how it compares to something else. And the argument is very logically flawed, because if circumcision and FGM are so incomparable, as feminists always say, why do they always compare them? Why do feminists always feel the need to bring up FGM whenever men are trying to talk about circumcision? They're the ones who say the two don't belong in the same conversation, but they're always the ones who force it in the same conversation. They're always the ones who attack and criticize men for talking about circumcision just because FGM also exists. That's not really an argument, saying, well, this thing exists and it's even worse, so therefore the thing you're talking about just doesn't matter. But again, the main argument here is about the physical effects that circumcision actually has, regardless of how it compares to something else. There were a lot of comments in that thread like this, and this is a common thing you hear from feminists, that the foreskin is just a piece of skin, and it's just removing a piece of skin. This is completely disingenuous and untrue, and it completely downplays the reality of what circumcision actually does and the damage that circumcision actually causes. Once again, watch the video I did, which I've linked in the description below, along with a write-up explaining the anatomy of the foreskin and the damage that circumcision actually does. But this is, again, an example of what MRAs mean when we say that feminists don't really care about men's issues, or don't even really understand men's issues. And you might say that's not fair, but just go through that comment thread. Again, I've linked it down below. Look at the comments that are really kind of mocking circumcision and really kind of making light of it, or saying it's not a big deal, or it's not that bad, or just plain wrong information, getting hundreds and thousands of upvotes. If feminists don't even take something as basic as body autonomy seriously, then how seriously can they be taking men's issues in general? You really kind of have to wonder that. Now, I know I said my next video is going to be about how feminists in the UK are working to legalize murder against men, sort of. The reason why that video is delayed is I'm actually reaching out to different feminist writers and organizations who are involved, and I'm trying to get an interview. So far, I haven't gotten any responses yet. Big surprise. But I'm going to give it a couple more days, and then if I don't get any responses, I'm just going to go ahead and make the video. But read the links down below. I've linked my circumcision video, a write-up I did under that, and then the last link in the description will be the comment thread from the 2x chromosome subreddit.